New comments from Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy are raising fresh questions about the government's true intentions on Brexit, and whether the UK could be edging closer to re-entering parts of the European Union's structures. Lammy was speaking on a podcast when he was asked repeatedly whether Labour would consider taking Britain back into the EU customs union. What followed wasn't a firm denial, but instead a series of evasive answers that have fueled speculation about a major shift in policy. The customs union is one of the key dividing lines of Brexit. Staying inside it means giving up the ability to strike independent trade deals and accepting that Brussels sets tariff policy. Leaving it was considered essential to restoring what Brexiteers described as economic sovereignty. Subsequently, any hint of reversing that decision is politically explosive. When pressed on whether the UK should rejoin, Lammy said he wanted to focus on making Brexit work, but then suggested that rejoining the customs union could, in his words, boost economic growth. He highlighted countries such as Turkey, which have partial customs union arrangements with the EU, and implied that Britain should look again at models that could ease trade frictions. Crucially, he refused 3 separate opportunities to rule out re-entry. Instead, he repeatedly returned to the argument that Brexit has damaged the economy and that the government needs to be pragmatic about future relations with Brussels. To the ears of critics, that sounded like the opening of the door for a soft Brexit reversal. These comments come at a time when pressure is building inside the political establishment to rethink Brexit entirely. Pro-EU campaign groups are lobbying for deeper alignment, and there are growing signs that Labour MPs, including those who stayed quiet during the Brexit years, believe the public mood is shifting. Lammy's remarks are already being interpreted as a deliberate testing of the waters. Labour's official stance is that the UK will not rejoin the single market, customs union or the EU. But the language coming from senior Labour figures has become more ambiguous since the party entered government. GB News political editor Christopher Hope today highlighted a key detail that suggests something could be happening behind the scenes in Downing Street.
They say this, so he says this 7 times, he refused to rule out reversing Brexit on a podcast with called the News Agents, run by LBC, with Emily Maitlis and others who are seen to be, remain adjacent, let's say about that. They may dispute that, but that's how I see it anyway. Not currently joining the Customs Union. This goes against the party's manifesto. There are red lines in place: no single market return, no customs union, no return to freedom of movement. Said again in PMQs on Wednesday by the Prime Minister, although he left out the freedom of movement bit, which I found interesting. But No.10 piled on me 3 messages into my phone in an hour saying no change, no change, no change. They are very worried about this idea that there could be a watering down of going back into the customs union. And just finally, Nick Thomas-Symonds. He's the Cabinet Office Minister in charge of negotiating with the EU on Brexit. He's now going to every single cabinet.
Wow.
That was decided on Tuesday. Something's happening. I think people who are concerned about Brexit are watching very closely. But he said there, David Lammy, it's not our current policy to go back into the customs union. That's not where we are. But you can see that countries like Turkey, with a customs union, seemingly benefiting and seeing growth in their economy. And again, that's self-evident.
Supporters of closer EU integration say that the reality of Brexit has been far more complicated and costly than promised. They argue that British exporters face unnecessary barriers, that consumer prices have increased, and that economic growth has suffered. For them, exploring a customs union deal is not about reversing Brexit in full, but about reducing friction in a way that helps businesses and stabilises trade. Staunch Leave campaigners, however, maintain the stance that partial re-entry would undermine the freedoms Britain fought for during the Brexit process. A customs union would mean accepting EU tariff policy, having a limited say over future trade agreements, and abandoning the ability to negotiate independent trade deals. Many also argue that such a move would be a betrayal of the referendum result and reopen years of division. There's also the question of sovereignty. During the referendum campaign, and in the years that followed, one of the strongest arguments for leaving was that Parliament, not Brussels, should decide the rules that govern Britain's economy. Rejoining the customs union could be seen as surrendering a key element of that control. This political tension is why Lammy's refusal to rule anything out has caused such a reaction. Even hinting at the possibility of customs union membership signals a willingness to reopen an issue that the public was repeatedly told would be settled permanently. Public and political tensions over the matter were clearly exposed in an intense debate on GB News, when Miriam Cates and leader of the Rejoin EU party, Richard Morley, clashed over David Lammy's comments.
Look, there was a historic referendum. The British public made their decision. It wasn't that long ago we actually formally left the EU. It was only just a handful of years ago. You know, is the government here jumping the gun? They're jumping the gun and they haven't given Brexit enough of a shot yet.
Well, good morning to you and thank you for having me. No, the government is not jumping the gun. It is reflecting not only the economic reality of Britain at the moment, but the mood of the people as well. And that is an important issue because I think it's very clear that most people in Britain see the problem of Brexit. It has been a chaos. It has caused enormous economic damage to Britain. 2,000 per annum is the cost to the average British citizen, is what it's cost us individually, let alone what it's cost the state. And I'm afraid...
Because that calculation is based on OBR projections of the UK's economic performance at the time, projections that neither the UK nor any other countries have met in Europe.
That's possible. I mean, we can, of course, argue about statistics to the end of the
well, you're basing your entire argument on statistics, so they'd better be correct.
Well, yeah, as you know, the average statistic from a variety of sources say that Britain is losing between 90 and 120 billion a year because of Brexit. And that, I'm afraid, is not really a challengeable statistic because
well, Richard, how much were we paying the EU to be a member? Wasn't it a similar amount of money, perhaps?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that question.
Can you remind me just what was the fee we paid to be a member of the European Union yearly? I think it was in the hundreds of billions. Was that right?
Yes, but we were receiving benefits from that input. We were receiving all sorts of returns from the EU, and we were receiving trouble-free trade. You see, the problem about Brexit, it has crucified our ability to export, particularly for small businesses who simply cannot handle the bureaucracy involved now.
But our exports have not decreased. Our trade with the EU has not decreased. That's just actual data.
But our GDP has decreased.
No, it hasn't. It's grown less than projected, as in line with all other European countries post the financial crash.
Well, you may say that. Obviously your channel is very pro-Brexit, and I respect your stance. This is the government data. I respect your stance, but you do realise that even the majority of the media is now beginning to realise that Brexit is a disaster. And many other people in many political parties are realising this. And I have no reason to doubt that it would be a very good policy for Nigel Farage in your own party, Reform, to consider moderating his stance on Brexit. Well, Nigel Farage should really think about joining the majority here, because the Labour Party is full now of people who wish to move towards closer ties with Europe, if not rejoining. So too are other parties. Obviously, the Green Party is making a great sway on this as well.
Richard, I mean, Labour's always been made up majority with a majority of people who support remaining in the European Union. And I would say most left-wing parties, including the Liberal Democrats and Greens, have always been on that end of the spectrum. It just happens now that Labour is in government. Now, when they went in during the last election, during the manifesto, they pledged, and the Prime Minister said many, many times that he wouldn't drag us back into the EU. Perhaps whether we could, you can talk about whether we should rejoin. Do you think that the government really has a mandate to be dragging us closer to the EU, given that that wasn't in their manifesto, nor was it pledged to the British people?
Well, the government has a mandate to look after the economy of Great Britain and the fortunes of its citizens. And that is what some people in this government are paying attention to. Obviously, not all the government is persuaded to this cause yet, but I do believe there is an increasing number of members of this government and the governing party that do believe that. And I do think that before this government is through, it will make moves towards rejoining the customs union at least. And you talked earlier about the referendum. That was now very nearly 10 years ago. Times do change. facts become clearer, and there is no reason on earth why we should be tied to a referendum that was taken basically in a different era, the pre-COVID world.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for coming on and having a hearty debate with us. We really do appreciate it. Richard Morley, leader of the Rejoin EU party there.
Quite
My
happy
pleasure.
to. Thank you, Richard.